Well, Coach Doherty, thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Lynch with a Leader. It is an honor to have you.
Oh, likewise. Thank you. Your list of podcast guests, I'm humbled to be amongst them.
Well, listen, you've just added to it. That's what I'm going to say. There's going to be a lot of other people look and go, how in the world did he end up on there? But I'm so glad that you did. You've had an amazing life. You look back at your career now and just reading all the places you've been and all the things you've done. When you were to go back to Long Island where you grew up, who did you think you were going to be as a
Wow.
little boy growing up?
Yeah, I thought I was going to be Rick Barry,
Mm,
Rick Barry or Larry Bird. Rick Barry was a 6'7" forward who was an all NBA, all star. And I was blessed to grow up on Long Island, where he played for the New York Nets back then
wow.
in the Nassau Coliseum, which was literally 5 miles from my house. And so I got to see, I now know Rick, which is kind of cool. And so I can call him Rick, but I got to really watch him. And at a young age, I thought 6'7" was the perfect basketball height because you could do everything, pass, handle, and shoot the ball. And he did that at such a high level. So yeah, it was Rick Barry.
Wow.
I had a
What
poster of him on my wall, by the way, Mike. Yeah.
do you really?
Oh, I
What,
did.
what
I did. I don't anymore. That would be weird. Anyway.
that would be a little strange. I was gonna say, man, come on, coach. So tell me about this. When did you see, this basketball thing might take me somewhere? It's
Yeah.
one thing to enjoy the game. It's another thing to go, all right, I think I might be pretty good at this. When did that begin to click for you?
Well, I was really fortunate to be pushed at a young age, and I was always tall. Um, but I realized, and I look back like, okay, I had some visionary type of skills, and I think I still do as you get to know yourself better.
Mm.
I could see down the road, and I knew that I I didn't want to be in the post as a player because I felt like at some point I wouldn't be the tallest player in the court. So I needed to develop perimeter skills.
Mm.
And Rick Barry was that model for me. And so, in the park near my house, call it the park, there were great players there. And I always played with older players. And so now I wasn't the tallest player on the court. So I was able to play out on the perimeter and handle the ball and face the basket and develop those perimeter skills that really, I think, benefited me down the road. And then I played, I was pretty good, in grammar school. I was one of the best players in the league, and then we won the Nassau County Championship. Then my freshman year, I played varsity basketball as a freshman, the first freshman to do that at a high school that had good basketball.
Mm. Mm.
And so Bob McKillop was my coach my freshman year, who coached Steph Curry at Davidson. And so I had great coaching. I had really blessed to go to camps. My dad signed me up in fourth grade to Gus Alfieri's All-American Camp. Gus Alfieri just passed away, legendary coach on Long Island. And had great coaches year round during the season, summertime, and great competition. And I love basketball. Like my dad was a minor league pitcher.
Mm-hmm.
And so growing up, every kid's first sport was baseball, little league
Yep.
baseball, t-ball, right? And we didn't have much soccer back then. And so it was basically you played four sports. You played street hockey, you played football, you played basketball, you played baseball, and then lacrosse on Long Island was big. So those are the main sports. But after like sixth grade, when I realized that I couldn't hit the ball after it came off the tee, and I got bored in the outfield. No offense, Mike. I got bored in the outfield. You got to you want the ball to be hit to you, but it's
That's
not
right.
hit to you. So you're standing there and you're throwing rocks and chasing frogs but in basketball, that was everyone got to touch the ball and there was movement, constant movement, and you could work on your game by yourself. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm all about controlling what you can control, even at an early age. I'm like, okay, I can outwork somebody else. I read a book. Shocking, I know. I read a book, right? I'm bragging. I read a book. I'm sorry. I'm from Long Island. I'm sarcastic, and that's one of my gifts. My wife doesn't think it's such a gift. She's from North Carolina. She thinks that sarcasm is rude, and Yankee go home. But anyway, so um, Bill Bradley's book, Life on the Run, and this is the power. I talked about the impact of three things on your life: the people you meet, the books you read, and the trauma in your life. And you can control the first two. So I read this book, Bill Bradley's Life on the Run, and he was a great player for the Knicks. And in his book, he said, if you aren't working as hard and you meet somebody else who is working harder than you, that person will have the advantage. I immediately quit baseball and said I wanted to be the hardest worker in the game of basketball. So that way I would always have the advantage. I could control that. And so then ninth grade, I played varsity, started as a sophomore and was a high school All-American. And I always dreamed about playing in college and playing in the NBA. And so, when I got to, started getting recruiting letters as a freshman and sophomore in high school, I knew I'd have a chance. And then being named All-American. And by that time, North Carolina offered me a scholarship. So, then that next level, right? I wasn't a great athlete, and I was playing AAU ball one summer, and I wrote a book called Rebound, From Pain to Passion, and talk about this. One of my teammates was Rodney McCray, who was an All-American high school player and played at Louisville. And we're sitting on a bus, and he asked me, so, Matt, where do you think where are you interested in going to school? And I said, North Carolina. And he looked at me and said, you think you can play there? And, like when people doubt you, like, okay, yeah, okay, yeah, okay. I embrace it. And then, Coach Smith, when a home visit, he's recruiting me and I'm being highly recruited. And he said, you'll be lucky to play by the time you're a junior. And I leaned forward and I said to myself, I'll show you. And I was a sixth man as a freshman. And then as a sophomore, I started on the national championship team. And in that Final Four was Louisville and Rodney McCray. So in my book, I say, yes, Rodney, I could play at North Carolina. Yeah. So anyway, that's a long story. You got an Irishman on at the end, the interview here. So you asked me like, how you doing, Matt? And all of a sudden, like maybe 20 minutes later, I'll let you ask your next question.
That's fantastic. You make my job easy, though. I love it. I love it. So what was it like? So here you are, a kid in Long Island, New York, and the famous Dean Smith sits in your house. I was a big college basketball fan growing up. Loved Dean Smith. Loved what you guys built at Carolina. As he sat there, what was it about him and the program that you went, this guy's told me I might not play till I'm a junior, but I am willing to go and work to do it. What drew you there?
Yeah, great question, Mike. And I bring this up a lot in my executive coaching practice. As you know, I'm a Vistage chair and executive coach. I work with small to mid-sized business owners and leaders. And so much of it starts with your vision, mission, core values, list of behaviors, and then can you hold people accountable? So do you have core values that you live by, you lead by? And then what are the behaviors that sprout from your core values so you can operationalize your core values? And then are you willing to hold people accountable? And the A players want high standards and want to be held accountable. And I was an A player. So he comes in and I was, my home visits were like Duke, North Carolina, Notre Dame, Virginia, Princeton, Holy Cross. And so, and I got the impression from the other schools, like, yeah, you'll come in as a freshman, you'll play a lot, maybe start. But he came in and, he was very comfortable. So I share this all the time in my leadership practice. 50% of communication is body language. 35% is tone. Only 15% of communication is content. And so I learned that from an executive coach, Jerry Bell, that I worked with when I was a head coach at North Carolina. And so Coach Smith came in, he was very relaxed. And I talk about this. Confidence and humility equal class. Okay. Confidence and humility equal class. And I think of different people that are really confident but aren't humble. And then there are people that aren't confident and are like really humble, and that's kind of weak. And Coach Smith had the sweet spot. And he was very confident, but he's humble. And he sat back, and his teams were in the top 10 every year. He had just come off coaching the Olympic team to a gold medal in 1976. So I just dated myself. So he was the bar. And now in sales, right? When you go and you find out who your competition is, and if you talk too much about your competition, the person can see that you're nervous about the competition. Yeah. Well, Coach Smith never talked about the competition. The competition talked about him. And so you could tell, now he's as a 17-year-old young man, I'm like, they sound a little paranoid about, that tells me that there must be something really special over there. And then I visited, and when I visited, they were on fall break, so there's nobody there, just the players. But I got to see them practice. And when I saw them practice, and I saw how they practiced, the intensity, everything was on time, everything was measured, and what he valued, I could do. Because it didn't require jumping high and being the fastest guy in the court. He valued moving without the ball. He valued passing. He valued being in the right place defensively. He valued communication. And I'm like, okay. Like I had a legal pad. I was taking notes at practice.
Wow.
Yeah. And so right after that visit, that was, I got home Sunday. My mom picks me up at LaGuardia Airport, and she looks at me, and I'm not a good poker player. Coming off the plane, she greets me. She goes, "You're going to Carolina, aren't you?" I'm like, "Yep." And that Wednesday, I called the coaches and told them that I wanted to go to Carolina.
Yeah. I want to sit on that for a second. So you go down there. What would be different about Matt Doherty now if you had chosen to go somewhere else?
Yeah.
What are skills you picked up there you may have gotten somewhere else, but that time there was used for you?
Yeah, great question. Oh man, there's so many things. I wouldn't have got to meet Michael Jordan.
Good one.
I mean, I get to every once in a while play golf with Michael and, text him, and he wrote the forward on my book. And, we wouldn't have won a championship, national championship. Some people say it's one of the best teams that ever played. It's one of the best final championship games ever played. First team play in national championship game in front of 63,000 people, in a domed arena. I wouldn't have come as maybe worldly. I think Coach Smith really stressed that he educated us beyond the court, took us places like Greece, and, the lessons that he taught. I refer to Coach Smith now so much, again, in my leadership practice, because those things that he taught us are transferable. I talk about the organizational triangle, that every organization is made up of talent at the top of the triangle, systems, and culture. And the better your systems, the better your culture, the better talent you'll attract, and the better they'll perform, and the better you'll retain them. And he had a great system, and he had a great culture. And he knew how to put his players, recruit to his system and put them in position to be successful. And he also could tweak his system. When you had unique talent, you tweak. And so, but his core values were always the same. It was play hard, play smart, play together. And that was the start of his culture. And then how do you drive that culture? And he did that. And I look back now, and in my leadership practice, when I think about culture, and I read, we have a speaker who's really good, David Friedman, who wrote a great book on culture by design, and it was one of the best books that I've read on culture. And when I was reading his book, Coach Smith came to light, because sometimes you understand, you feel it, right?
Yeah.
And that's when you talk about what was it different about Coach Smith. It felt different. And I explain when I give keynote talks, it's like walking into Starbucks versus Dunkin' Donuts. All right. No offense to Dunkin' Donuts. Or it's Chick-fil-A, you're in Atlanta, versus McDonald's.
Yep.
Right. They just do it different. It feels different, but you don't know that it's intentional until you get behind the curtain and you say, oh, yeah, okay, now I know they drive that. They are going to greet you with good eye contact and say certain things that trigger certain emotions, like how may I help you, or thank you for coming, and call you out by name, and their shirts are tucked in, and they're they're just they emphasize those little things, and Coach Smith did that. And one of his favorite quotes, and I had the pleasure of working as the head coach in North Carolina, so I got to see him in a different light. But he would say, praise the actions you want repeated. Okay. And I immediately thought of my mother. When I was 8 years old, and in the grocery store, actually probably 6, because my brother wasn't born yet. And I had 3 older sisters, so I'm in the grocery store with her at Wallbaum's, and I'm getting antsy, and I'm starting to, get a little frustrated, and she could tell, and she had great emotional intelligence, and she said, "Oh, Matthew, you're such a good boy. You're so patient. Thank you." And I'm like, "Oh!" I stood up, like, "Oh, okay." Like she, that's right. That's one of the speakers we have in Vistage says, good leadership is manipulation with good intent. So she was manipulating me into being patient instead of getting mad at me for being impatient.
Yep.
And so, so Coach Smith would say, praise the actions you want repeated. And it's the simple things like, hey, good screen, way to hit the first open man. And so, that culture he drove intentionally. It starts out with, again, the vision, mission, the core values, and the behaviors that drive winning, that drive your culture, and then holding people accountable when they don't do it. But also, accountability is not just catching people doing something wrong. Accountability is catching them doing right too. Going back to praising the actions you want repeated, because everyone, and Jay Billis brought this to light when I interviewed him on my podcast. Accountability is not a bad thing. But we all associate it with getting someone in trouble.
Yeah.
But hey, Mike, thanks for, being on time today. Thanks for, asking me that question. That's accountability.
That's right.
Right. And so I don't think we use that tool enough.
You get to play alongside, and I just want to hit this on one question, but you play alongside Michael Jordan, probably the greatest player.
Let me interrupt, Mike.
Yes, please.
Listen, I'm your guest, right? And you're now insulting me by saying I played alongside Michael Jordan. I want to state this for your listening audience that I was there first. So Michael played alongside me.
There we go.
For the record. I want to straighten, right? Thank you. Thank you.
Now everybody will be clear.
Thank you. Right.
Now everybody will be clear.
Thank you very much. I just want, this is breaking news on the Lynch podcast.
That's it. That's
Lynch
it.
with
And
the leader.
and all three people are riveted with the story that we're about to tell. So it'll be great.
Yeah, your wife, my wife, and
no, it's not even my wife. No, she's bored. She hears all my stories here. It's got to be somebody else. So here we are. You're with Michael Jordan. His work ethic has always been notorious from NBA. Did you even see that back in college with this young guy coming into the program? Was that work ethic part of him then, or is
sure.
that something he grew into?
I think it was definitely part of him. That he was early at practice, late to leave. I think the great ones love the game, right?
Yeah.
They have that passion. And I think just a genuine love of basketball, and then the love of competition.
Good.
And, the pride, a healthy pride that, all right, I want to be prepared. I want to be the best I can be. I want to improve my areas of weakness. So Michael was always a hard worker and always went hard in drills. And one thing I will add is I call it being an aggressive listener. He really listened, and you listen with your eyes too. There's a tremendous picture of Michael checking into a game and Coach Smith going over to talk to him and leaning down, and Michael's on his knees, and Michael is looking up, just staring right through him. And I brought that up. I was with Charles Oakley recently. Charles played with Michael with the Bulls and then played for the Knicks. And Charles lives in Atlanta, ironically. And so we're talking about listening. And I say this all the time. Listening is a talent. Like people talk about running and jumping, but listening is a talent. Playing hard is a talent. And a skill. And so Charles tells the story of playing in an all-star game, and he went to a Division III school, Virginia Union, and Dean Smith was coaching this all-star game, and Coach Smith put in a simple rule: 2 passes before a shot. And when people didn't abide by that rule, he subbed them out. And he didn't tell them why, he just subbed them out. And then Charles passed the ball. Didn't shoot the ball before 2 passes. He played, most of the game, had like 26 points and 12 rebounds. He said, I just listened. What? Like, how about that? Like, just listen. Michael was a great listener.
That's a fantastic point. And what I love about that is that's a choice.
That's
right?
A choice.
Listening, yeah, it's not an ability. It's something anybody can do if they choose to do it. And you don't associate the great ones with listening typically. Right. So that's really good. How hard was it to translate from playing? And you spent many years in coaching at Notre Dame and UNC and SMU, and Florida Atlantic. How hard was it to transition from being a player to a coach? Was it harder than you thought it would be, or easier than you thought it would be?
Good question. When I was done playing, I didn't think I wanted to coach. I thought I was going to get rich and work on Wall Street. And after a few years, I realized I hated it and quit, moved to Charlotte, thought I was going to get rich in the real estate business in 1989, and started coaching an AAU team and was doing the radio at Davidson at the time. And then Bob McKillop took over at Davidson and hired me. And then I loved it. I loved everything about it. I loved the scouting. I loved the recruiting. I loved the camaraderie. So, I didn't go right from playing to coaching. So it was definitely an upgrade. I was making probably a third of what I was making on Wall Street, but I didn't care. And I worked, longer hours. As a recruiter. So it wasn't that hard, quite frankly. I think because having played and coached, having played at North Carolina and having that in my blood, and then working for Bob McKillop, somebody I'd played for, I don't think the transition was that hard. The transition to being a head coach, a little different.
Yeah. What do head coaches wear that the average listener to this podcast who's in business and they're doing life and they look at a college, we're going to take college specifically, a college head coach, what are the pressures they deal with nobody would ever imagine that they're
Yeah.
having to deal with?
Well, a couple things. And ironically, I just talked about this with a CEO who went from being, vice president or president to the CEO. And he's like, I've been in the role, the previous CEO wasn't that active. So I was really, the acting head coach, acting CEO. But then he formally retired and I was formally put in that CEO chair. And he says, it just feels different. I feel the pressure. I feel the eyes on me. And I said, yeah. I said, the proverbial moving 18 inches over from the assistant role to the head coach. And Coach Williams, Roy Williams, I worked for 7 years at Kansas, used to say, like, the assistants don't care as much about things, about winning, as the head coach does. And, you kind of, those are like roll your eye kind of moments, like, yeah, whatever, like, yeah, sure. I care. I mean, it's like, and then I became the head coach at Notre Dame. I'm like, he was pretty much spot on, because you have like this CEO, like he is responsible for everyone's livelihood and then funding their families and making sure they have food on the table. And, as a head coach, like basketball coach, you got to answer to the media. You got to answer to parents. You got to answer to high school coaches. You got to answer to your staff. You got to answer to the players. And just the inherent pressure of when you lose, it gets to a point where it's like the end of the world. And when you win, it's a relief, not a joy. And I think that especially when you're at big places like at North Carolina, when you win, it's more of a relief than a joy. When I was at Notre Dame, you'd win, it was a joy because they didn't have as big a winning tradition as they did at North Carolina. So I think just the pressure, and then how do you turn it off when you're with your family? And I was awful at that, Mike. I just wasn't good. Couldn't compartmentalize. Like the great ones can compartmentalize.
Yeah.
And the presidents, you think of like, apparently Bill Clinton was really good at compartmentalization. And I wasn't great at that. So I'd let one thing bleed into another where I couldn't just like, it's almost like, closing the garage door and moving to the next garage. I kept the garage doors open. And
your comment, relief, not joy, I've never heard put quite that way, but that typifies so many guys that I talk to, especially in the college baseball world, and it's hard. I mean, you're series to series, game to game, you're high, you're low. How did you, so I know you have a strong faith. How did your faith even begin to play into your leadership while you were playing, coaching, and now even what you're doing now?
Yeah, great question. I grew up Irish Catholic and altar boy, fourth grade, the whole deal. Came home from school. My mother, Mary Cleary Doherty, with the rosary beads under her pillow. I came home and said, "Mom, I'm going to be an altar boy." And she immediately, and she told this story to me later, immediately thinks, "Oh, my son's going to be a priest." And my next breath, I said, "Yeah, altar boys get paid for weddings and funerals." And it blew her high. And then when I was going to North Carolina, she was worried that if I went to school in the South, I'd lose my religion. And I say now that I lost my religion, but I gained my faith. So I'm a Christian. I'm not a practicing Catholic. My wife and I, we actually now watch online service, Gary Hamrick out of Cornerstone Chapel in Leesburg, Virginia. We've gone up there to see him in person. We were scheduled to go to Israel with him and a large group of his followers last October, and the war broke out. So, hopefully we get to do it this fall. But I don't think And this is a story I tell when I witness, if you will. I felt that why did I lose my job? I'm the head coach at Notre Dame. We have a good year. I get recruited to take over at North Carolina. My first year, we have a great year. I'm national coach of the year. Second year, rebuilding. Third year, rebuilding. And I get fired. So I go to heaven and I'm going to be like, okay, God, let's talk. 2003, like what was up? Oh, wait a second. Before you start, God, this is my version. This is what I think you're going to tell me. I got too much too fast, too cocky, wasn't humble, wasn't putting you first. So being Irish Catholic, we're hard headed and you needed to hit me over the head, not just like nudge me. And I go back to your life's impacted by three things: the books you read, the people you meet, and the trauma in your life. So the trauma in my life was being forced to resign in 2003 from my alma mater. And it was in a manner where my leadership was questioned publicly. And so, and God's probably going to say, yep, that's it. You needed to put me first. You were putting you first. And so I think that I got humbled. And when you're broken, okay. And I say this, I said, there's a lot of atheists out there that I think if they're driving their car off the cliff, they become Christians real quick, right? Because what happens when your car's, falling off a cliff, you driving off a cliff, you say, oh God, please help me. You start praying.
Yeah.
And so God doesn't promise us a smooth path. He's going to promise us hardship. And in doing so, we become closer to him. And so I think that's what he did. And now I have to constantly remind myself that, it's God, it's Jesus. I'm blessed to have the life I do, and the comparison games as an athlete, this, you can't fight the comparison that drove you as an athlete. I'm better than you. I'm going to start. I have a better batting percentage. I'm a better pitcher. So I start. And then all of a sudden that's gone and your identity is kind of gone. And then how do you, fight the comparison? How do you turn that switch off and say, oh, I don't care. Mike, you got a bigger house than me. You got a bigger car. You belong to a nice country club. I don't. And that's okay. Where's the healthy balance, the nuance? And the devil devil's good. The devil's really good. And I was just listening to a podcast from John Gordon, and he had a country western singer on there talking about it. I'm drawing a blank on his name. And his son died in a drowning accident. And he was in the backyard with his daughter, and it happened on his watch. And just talking about dealing with those types of things. And when he was on stage, was it about him or was it about God, right? And so we got to glorify God and do our works for his glory. And I need those constant reminders because we practice religion, we practice Christianity, we practice baseball, we practice golf, we practice leadership. Everything's a practice, and what happens when you don't practice? Well, you're not going to find the strike zone. What happens when you don't practice? You're going to skull a chip shot across the green. And so, does 1 hour a week, is that enough to go to church and listen? Or should we practice every day to get our reps in so we become better Christians, right? And, some people say there's no degrees of Christianity. You're either Christian or not, but I go into the rating system as, you rate prospects. I'm maybe a 3-star Christian, I got work to do. Yeah, I got work to do. I got to get my reps in.
I've even heard you say leadership is practice.
Leadership is practice.
Why would you say it that way?
Because you can't take a seminar or read a book and say, I've arrived.
That's good.
Leadership is you get the ball, and here we talked off air, the sports analogies in leadership. Okay, leadership is you get the ball into the red zone, you think you're going to score, and somebody pushes a button and extends the field another 100 yards. You never arrive.
Yep.
There's no finish line.
Right.
And the same thing like golf, like leadership's like golf. You birdie number 9. You make the turn and you're even par. That never happened for me, by the way. And then you get your hot dog, you go to 10 tee, you're feeling good about yourself, and you spray one right into someone's backyard. Right? That's leadership.
Yep.
And so, like golf, what do the best golfers do after their first round at the Masters? The best golfers go to the range with their swing coach and tweak their swing. And so as leaders, as Christians, are we going to the range to work on our swing on a regular basis?
I think all of us wish there was a finish line to this, and there's not. There's not a finish line in my business or your business.
Well, here's the finish line, and you know what I'm getting ready to say. Probably, it's the grave.
That's right.
It's the heaven, right? Are you making it to heaven or you're not? And by the way, from the research I've done, not everyone's getting there. Like, don't think like you can in the last quarter throw the Hail Mary, Doug Flutie pass, and expect to get into heaven. No, I don't think so, because you have you can't, like, you're not getting in there by good works.
That's right.
Do you really believe that Jesus is your Lord and Savior? That gets you in with, I think with some efforts. You can't just then say, I'm going to sit in the couch and, do bad things, watch bad things. So, so it's I know what I want to say. In Charlotte, the Billy Graham Library. So when is it over? When's leadership over? When have you arrived as a leader or a Christian? So you go there and you see, like, Billy Graham's wife was awesome. And on her tombstone, and they're buried side by side, on her tombstone it says, end of construction, thank you for your patience. She saw that on a sign, on the highway, and she said, I want that on my tombstone.
How about that? So
it's, when we get to, if we're blessed to get to heaven, that's the finish line. And people say, well, what's your goals in life? And like, I call it the big house. I just want to get to the big house.
Oh, that's so good. That is so good. I love it. I want to sit for a second on the 6 no's of leadership. I love this. I heard you on another podcast talking about this and read some articles about it. And I want to grab a couple of those. You use this acronym, STEVIT, for a teaching lesson. What does it mean for you to know yourself? Why is it so important? I'm going to be meeting with a group of coaches in the morning. Why is it so important that they understand who they are?
Well, if you don't know yourself, you can't lead others, right? So we all have blind spots. We all have weaknesses. And I think that the number one thing in leadership, and the STEVIT acronym, which I just made up, and
that's so good.
I Googled it. And I said, okay, that sounds like a word, sounds like a name. And it was turned out to be like some Eastern European name. So I make up a story that I recruited this big kid out of Wisconsin whose name's STEVIT. And the S stands for self, T for team, E for environment, V for vision, I for industry, and T for the truth. I think the big 3 are self, team, and truth.
Yep.
And so you can't lead others if you don't know yourself, because people aren't going to follow somebody that lacks self-awareness.
That's right.
Right? Like, if you think you're really smart and you're not, I'm not following you. If you're really smart and you think you're dumb, I'm not following you. If you think you're funny and you're not, all these things. But if you don't know yourself, you then don't know where your blind spots are, and won't surround yourself with people that augment your skill set. So, I knew as a head coach, I didn't I like three things. I like to recruit, raise money, and coach basketball. So the other things, I needed to hire other people. Like, I hate looking at budgets. I hate looking at financial statements. I didn't want to run camp. I didn't want to do. So I'm going to, hire staff to augment my skill set. Now, I probably could have surrounded myself. Like, sometimes we hire people that are like us.
Yep.
And I'm very intense. So knowing yourself, and this is one of the things about getting fired. I went on a leadership journey, and I then took assessments and had 360s done. And I wish I would have done that before I became a head coach. See, sometimes people do it too late.
Yep.
But maybe it wouldn't stick, right? So I did this 360, and I did a Myers-Briggs assessment.
Yep.
I remember sitting down with an executive coach a couple of months after I got fired at UVA, and I'm in her living room, and she had me do the Myers-Briggs, and she said, I was very depressed. I mean, I walked in there, head down, slouched down on her couch, and she said, okay, let's talk about the Myers-Briggs assessment. You're an ENTJ. And I kind of think, wow, ENTJ, like, I've been called a lot of 4-letter words before, Mike, but never an ENTJ. Cameron Indoor Stadium, I walked in there, they don't say ENTJ, like, no. So I'm like, huh? ENTJ? She goes, yeah, only 2% of the population are ENTJs. So I start to sit up. I'm thinking, 2%, that's elite, right, Mike? I mean, elite.
Yep.
I'm thinking I'm kind of like a badass. And she goes, no, you don't get it. That means 98% of the population don't think like you think.
That's right.
That was an aha moment for me.
Wow.
So that was one where, okay, now I know, because my emotional intelligence was not good. Because I thought everyone should think like me.
Yep.
And so then now I know myself. So now I get to know my team better. Now I realize not everybody's like me. So what is Mike like? What is Tommy like? What is Brendan like? So now I started to do personality assessments on my players when I got to SMU, because now, how do they like to learn? How do they like to be coached? So that's the art of coaching, is the emotional intelligence, which I never heard of emotional intelligence till I went on this leadership journey in 2003. I'm taking a class at the Penn, and it just, like, I got thirsty for leadership, and so I wanted more and more and more, and that got me on the road to be an executive coach. So, treating everybody fairly, but not treating everybody the same. Right.
That's right.
And that's a delicate dance as a leader, because if people perceive that I am giving you favoritism because you don't like to be yelled at, and I can yell at somebody else, then that may be received differently. And this is where Michael Jordan was so, like, people don't realize these great athletes, the greats, are smart as heck. So Michael Jordan told me a story about Dennis Rodman, and how Dennis got to the team, and Phil and Michael wanted Dennis on the team. And Michael knew inherently, and, Michael's now probably around 30, still a young man. And he says to Scotty, they both like to get triple doubles. And Michael said to Scotty, listen, if Dennis is in our area, we need to let him get the rebound, and he could give it to us, and we'll start the break. So we need to sacrifice our individual stats for Dennis, because that's part of his identity, right? Defense, rebounding. So if we're taking rebounds from him, he loses part of his identity, and that'll frustrate him. So Michael says we would alligator arm some rebounds in front of Dennis, and Dennis will get the ball and he'd give it to us. We start the break. What's the difference? And he said they were playing in New Jersey, And I think Michael and Scotty both had triple doubles, and Rodman ended up getting 2 technicals and kicked out of the game.
Took his job.
Then he came to his hotel room, knocked on his door, and said, "Hey, Mike, you got a cigar?" And that was his way of apologizing. And so, but Michael had that self-awareness. So Michael understood his
fantastic.
And then, the last T was the T for truth.
That's right.
And we need truth tellers in our lives. For me, that's my wife, for better or worse. Who on your staff can stop you and tell you the truth and say, Mike, you're screwing up.
Yep.
Close the door or not close the door. And then are you going to welcome that? Because if we don't manage the truth will manage us right out the door.
That's right. And if you're not self-aware, you're going to miss it anyways.
You're going to miss it anyway.
That's right.
And it goes back to the body language. Most of the time you see it in body language. When you deliver a message and all of a sudden people are kind of not really, you could just see the shoulders, they slip down in their chair. They don't look at you, but you need somebody that can close the door and say, Mike, I think you screwed up in that staff meeting, the way you talked to Joe. And I believe you need to make it right. And you have to say, Matt, thank you very much. I appreciate you saying that. And even better, saying that in front of the team. Because now you create a culture where it's okay to tell truth to the power.
As you work with so many CEOs, head coaches, typically the higher up the ladder they climb, the less truth gets to them.
That's right.
Why? And I heard you say this in another podcast, and I thought it was so good. You said you would make sure any coaching staff, if you ever coached again, there would be one person on their business card. The title of their job would be truth teller.
That's right.
Why do you know you need that bad?
Oh, because I know in the past, all right, this is knowing yourself. I'm intense. I'm driven. I'm tall. Okay. I'm a little loud. And so what does physical presence have to do with that? Well, it's intimidating. So I had to learn to make myself smaller. Well, how do I do that? I kneel down or I sit down. And so my tone. So I would go into an assistant coach. Again, I'm intense. I move fast. I make quick decisions. That's good as a basketball coach on the sidelines. It's not necessarily good for strategic decisions. I get impatient. That's big, it's your biggest strength, your biggest weakness. So There were times I know I did this. Let's say you're my coach that's in charge of academics. You oversee academics. So you work with the academic advisor. You're getting weekly updates on kids and how they're doing with attendance and their grades. So I walk into your office. I'm 6'7" now. You're sitting down, and I kind of lean over your desk and say, Mike, is I'm hearing stories about Joe. Is Joe's doing okay in school, right? And I'm nodding my head, and I'm leaning over and looking down at you, and you're like, yeah, Joe's doing fine. I walk out of the office. In my mind, I check that box. Joe is doing fine in school. You are now breaking out in a sweat, and you walk to the other assistant's office and say, hey, man, Coach Doherty just came in, and boy, how big he is, and he just came in and said, Joe's doing well in school, right? And nodding his head. And so kind of led me into having to say, yeah, he's doing well in school. Joe's got like 3 Fs and 2 Ds. He might not be eligible next semester. I didn't know what to tell him. So I didn't give you a chance to tell me the truth. I didn't grease the skids. I wanted the answer quickly. I wanted the right answer, and I wanted to move on to, what's next. And I think that CEOs, leaders, need to be empowered with 3 things: cast your vision, drive your culture, engage in large business transactions. Okay. And so you have to create space on your daily calendar to engage properly with your team. And that way, the truth has a better chance of surfacing. So if your daily calendar stacked up, meeting after meeting after meeting with no buffer in between, you're going to go from meeting A to meeting B, meeting C, and you're not going to have room for those crucial conversations, we call them, that move the needle in your organization. So people one of the things I see with CEOs, they feel guilty, right? We talk about don't operate out of fog, fear, obligation, guilt. So the guilt of, man, I'm not doing any heavy lifting. Like I sit in my office and I think. I walk the floor, managing by walking around, right? I walk around like I don't feel like I'm breaking a sweat, and I'm not. You're not supposed to. You're leveraging your talent to leverage other talent to do the job. Your job is to cast a vision, drive the culture, engage in large business transactions. So, you're going to meet with the head of another company, see if a merger makes sense, or if you need to close a deal, you come in and finish, close like Mariano, I like to say. I'm a Yankee fan.
Yep.
And so, but if you're doing too much day to day, you don't have time for these crucial conversations that drive the culture of your organization.
That's fantastic. That is absolute gold, because I think and so many CEOs grow up through the grassroots of the organization. So the old Jim Collins thing, they grew up through the grassroots and they know every detail of the organization. And it's really easy to get bogged down in the middle of that, which is why they have coaches, which is why Vistage exists, to sit on the outside, to sit on the shoulder, to go, hey, there's a better way of doing this. That is really, really good. Final question of the day is this. I believe, and I think Scripture teaches that, in fact, in the book of Acts, it says David served his purpose in his generation, and then he was done. And I love that line. And I believe God has created us for a great purpose. What do you think is the purpose God created Matt Doherty for in this generation?
Yeah, thank you. And I've done a lot of work on this recently. My purpose is to teach and coach. And my mission is to make a positive impact on the people I meet and the groups I work with while dropping breadcrumbs to the Lord. Bingo.